Welcome to Protect Your Future on the Open Road, a brief talk by Tom McGrath, Virginia's motorcycle lawyer. Tom's known as the motorcycle lawyer in Virginia because he combines his love of motorcycling with his legal expertise. He's also a well-known spokesman for motorcycling and the right to ride. As the founder of the Virginia Coalition of Motorcyclists, he works closely with the state's lawmakers on motorcycle legislation, highway safety, and other important issues. While motorcycling is exciting, in his work, Tom has seen many bikers devastated, financially as well as physically, through no fault of their own. In this presentation, Tom will highlight some simple steps that all motorcyclists should take to help ensure their financial future and their families in case of an accident.
Here's a question for you. How many of you believe that your neighbor, the guy next door, the guy up the road, down the road from you, is going to go to his agent and say to his agent, I want you to sell me all the liability coverage you can sell me in case I go out and hit somebody? It isn't going to happen, is it? You know that, and I know that. Now, how are we going to protect ourselves from the guy that goes to his agent and says, I've had it, just sell me what the state says I have to have? And in Virginia, that means that the agent is going to sell you $25,000 worth of liability coverage. And what that means is that if you go down the street and hit someone unavoidedly or by accident, that your company is going to pay $25,000. That's all they'll ever pay to that person. So most of us, motorcyclists, have to be concerned of one thing. Most of our injuries are larger than that. Most of our injuries are lower limb injuries, lower leg injuries. And the result of that injury is usually a medical bill that ranges from $40,000 to $50,000. So is that $25,000 that this person purchased, is that going to be enough money to compensate you? Probably 80 to 85% of all cases, the person that hits you is going to have the minimum limits. They're going to have $25,000, and you know, and I know, that if you're on a motorcycle and you get hit, particularly in the lower leg, it's a real serious injury. If you don't lose the leg, you're going to probably wind up with pins and screws down there somewhere. Every time it gets cold and every time the weather changes, you're going to feel it. And the rest of your life, you're going to have that problem of having that permanent injury, and $25,000 isn't going to be enough. And you say, but Tom McGrath, you're a lawyer. We can go sue these people. That's right, you can. And you might have to at some point. You might have to sue the person that hit you. But the first thing you got to do is say, how am I going to get any money out of them if they own everything in joint name with their wife? Well, you're not. You're not. Because Virginia law, only the person who caused the injury is the person who is going to compensate you. So, if they've only got $25,000 of coverage or no coverage, you have to look to your uninsured motorist protection. So the question is, how can you protect you and every member of your household, every family member, from a devastating injury? There's something you can do for yourself and every resident relative that lives in your home. And that is this. Rule number one is that the more liability coverage you buy in Virginia, the more uninsured motorist protection you get. What does this mean? This means that if the person who hits you only has $25,000 of liability coverage and you have $100,000 of uninsured motorist coverage, then you would be eligible to collect the $25,000 from their coverage and $75,000 from your uninsured motorist coverage. Because once their company offers the $25,000, you're eligible for the $75,000 under your policy. And people say to me, well, that's against my coverage. Is that going to increase my rate? No. No, you weren't at fault in the accident. And you paid an extra premium for the uninsured motorist coverage. And that's what we're talking about today, is how to protect you and how to protect your rider and the rest of your family. Rule number two, the more liability coverage you buy, the less expensive or the cheaper it gets. For example, the average difference in premium in Virginia between a $25,000 liability policy and a $100,000 liability policy is only $20. The average difference in Virginia between a $25,000 policy and a $500,000 policy is $30 to $35. Here's another thing about Virginia law. Under Virginia law, and this is great for us motorcyclists, because nobody will put our bike on the same policy with our car insurance, at least very few. And the good news about that is this, that under Virginia law, you get to add policies together. You add them together or stack them to know how much uninsured motorist you have. For example, on my motorcycle, I may have 100,000 of liability, which, as you know, gives me 100,000 of uninsured motorist. On my car, I may have 500,000 of liability, which gives me 500,000 of uninsured motorist. So I'm looking at 600,000 of insurance against 25,000 or even 100,000, and I don't even have to worry about what the other person has. That's the key to remembering in this situation, is that you get to add policies together in the same household. The same household. That means if your ne'er-do-well brother moves back in with you and he owns a car, you would get the advantage of his policy as well as your own. Not a bad deal. So when your father-in-law and your mother-in-law say, we're coming to live with you, relax. Find out how much coverage they've got first, then invite them in. Here's how it works. I had a client of mine who was run over by a drunk driver. The drunk had $25,000 worth of liability coverage. I went to her home. I looked at her policy. She had a $100,000 liability policy. So you know what that means? That means she had $100,000 of uninsured motorists. Well, I automatically knew right there that the least amount of money she was going to get with her injuries and her medical bills was $100,000. About that time, her son came walking in to the room, and I said to him, do you have a car? Yes. Do you have a policy? Yes. Let me see it. When he showed me that policy, he had $300,000 in liability coverage, and you know what that means? He had $300,000 of uninsured motorists. His company said, oh no, we're not a part of this. We don't have to pay anything. We went to court. We got a verdict for $385,000, and here's how we collected. $25,000 from the drunk's policy, $75,000 from my client's policy, and $285,000 from her son's policy. And we collected it all. Why? Because a policy is written to give you, the insured, and every resident relative living in your household protection. It's protection for you and every member of your family. That's what we're talking about today. So what I want you to do is call your agent. Don't take my word for it. Call your agent and say, I want to raise my limits. I want to raise my limits on my car. It's a lot less money on your car than it is on your bike to raise your limits. So buy all that you can on your car. You may only be able to raise your limits on your bike to 100, possibly more depending on the company. Another question that comes, people say to me, well, I've got my car and my bike. They're with the same company. The question is, do you have separate policy numbers? If you have separate policy numbers, then you have separate policies. And then you look at what is my coverage. People, another thing they say to me is, you're sitting there and you're saying, well, I've got full coverage. I don't have to worry about this, Mr. McGrath. Full coverage has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Full coverage means you have liability, you have property damage, you have uninsured motorist property damage, you have collision, comprehensive, and theft. That's full coverage. That still doesn't tell me how much you have protection for you. And for me, I think my body's worth a whole lot more money than my motorcycle. So I jacked up my collision coverage and my comprehensive coverage. I pay a bigger deductible. Why? Why do I pay a bigger deductible? Because what I save at that end of my policy, I apply to the liability and the uninsured motorist. Gives me as much as they'll sell me. That's the secret to this whole thing. A couple of the other things I need to warn you about are this. If you add accessories to your motorcycle, if you change your motorcycle in any way, then you need to make sure that you go back to your insurance company, up the coverage. If you've got collision coverage, up it, because you've changed that bike. That bike's no longer worth what the NADA or the book value is on it. You've increased the value of it. You need to increase the amount of insurance coverage on it if you're carrying collision. Also, if you're pulling a trailer, you need to make sure that that trailer is covered. But that trailer is not covered on your policy unless it's specifically added to that policy. So if you get hit by someone and that trailer is destroyed and you don't have insurance on that trailer, either added to the policy or on a separate policy, unless the person that hits that trailer has insurance, you're not going to collect for that trailer. Again, remember to add these other things to your policy as you change or add things to your motorcycle. Keep it up to date. Okay, now you've listened and I've talked about coverages and what you need and what you should do, and let's go back over them again. One thing I want you to do, call your agent and get these limits raised. Number two, if you've modified your bike or you've added a trailer or accessorized, make sure that your policy covers those things. Number three, don't try to do this stacking thing by yourself without legal counsel. It's a very slippery slope and it's extremely dangerous. And my legal advice to you is do not try to do this. If you have a question about your policy and what your policy means and whether it's sufficient or not, give me a call. I'll answer your questions. I appreciate your coming. I appreciate your listening. Hope to see you on the road, and keep the shiny side up.
We hope this presentation has been helpful and that you will make certain you have done all you can to safeguard your future. Thanks for your attention and see you on the road.